Welcome to Propel, a podcast by Fellowship Pacific to propel you and your ministry forward in the mission God has for you. I'm your host, Jessica Powell, and in today's episode, David Horita, our regional director here at Fellowship Pacific, talks with Marc Kinna, the Executive Vice President Operations and Chief Operating Officer at Baptist Housing. Baptist Housing has been one of our partnering agencies since they started in 1964. They are one of the largest faith-based providers of seniors housing and care in British Columbia, serving over 2,700 seniors in 21 residences around the province. They have over 1,800 team members, and together, they are all about providing housing, healthcare, and spiritual care ministry to seniors in our province. You'll get to hear Marc talk about the incredible ministry opportunities that exist in senior care, and how the Covid-19 pandemic has only increased both the opportunity and need for the care and support they provide at Baptist Housing. He shares about how they've had to find different ways of providing that care and support in this time, and he shares ways that we can be helping and ministering to seniors as well. So, let's listen in now to David's conversation with Marc Kinna.
Hello, my name is David Horita. I'm the Regional Director for Fellowship Pacific, and glad to be doing this podcast, spending some time with all of you in our churches and our range of people in our various cities and places around British Columbia and Yukon. Today, we're spending some time with Marc Kinna. Marc Kinna is a friend I've known for quite a while. He's a friend to Fellowship Pacific, has been involved in it for a long time, and is really important in the work that Baptist Housing does. Some of you maybe don't know this. Baptist Housing is one of maybe our largest partnering agency with Fellowship Pacific, and they do a lot of really great things in partnership with us. So that's been going back right to 1964 when they started. So this isn't something new or something we just developed recently, but rather been involved in that kind of partnership for a long time. From my impression, it wasn't here in 1964, obviously, but I feel like the relationship right now is probably better than it has ever been. And it's been good in the past, but I think it's really great now. And I know Fellowship Pacific churches and individuals and us as a ministry center have used their services for a really long time. So in all kinds of ways, actually, and maybe we'll get into as we go along. Marc, do you want to introduce yourself maybe?
Sure. Thanks, David. So I'm the Chief Operating Officer with Baptist Housing, and I've had the privilege of working in this ministry since 2006. I'm a fellowship guy going back to 1988 when I started to attend South Delta Baptist Church, and in 1996 moved out to the Langley area where we started to attend Southridge Fellowship Baptist when it started, and so have been involved in the fellowship for a long time. Haven't been around since 1964, but sure, I'm glad to work with Baptist Housing now in the great work we do, not only with seniors in BC, but also to support the fellowship around the province.
Right. And actually, one of the things with Marc, he didn't mention, this is his official title. I looked it up, so I was super impressed, Marc, by your important title. I'm going to try and get a more important title, but yours is Executive Vice President of Operations and Chief Operating Officer, so that's a pretty big handful.
Yeah, it's Marc for short.
Yeah, Marc for short. I should add as well, just for those of you that don't know Marc is a worship leader at Southridge Fellowship, where I also attend. And one of the things I've appreciated about Marc a lot is that when he's leading worship, he's truly in the moment, present in the moment, enjoying the opportunity to do that. So you're rarely going to see somebody enjoy the worship more as a leader than you'd see that in Marc. So just the smile on his face and enjoyment of it's something that I really enjoy and appreciate. So in case I haven't said that to you, Marc, thanks for that.
Thanks, David.
Noticeable for that. Well, why don't you tell us a little bit in that big job title that you've got of what the scope of your role is in Baptist Housing and what you do?
Well, I'm involved in leading our operations, and so we have 21 residences around the province of BC. We're in the interior, Salmon Arm and Armstrong, then in the Okanagan and Kelowna, in the Lower Mainland, and then over in the Victoria area. And so in those 21 residences around the province, we serve over 2,700 seniors who live with us in affordable housing, independent living, assisted living, or long-term care. We have a large team. We've got over 1,800 team members who serve with us. And our ministry is really all about housing, healthcare, and spiritual care ministry. So seniors are a vibrant harvest field, as often they're reflecting on their lives and seeking a spiritual connection. Even when we might think that they've already made those decisions, they're actively seeking, and so it's a privilege to serve them in that way. One of the other cool things that we're involved in the last couple of years is the spiritual care training program, which Ray Sosi has been leading for us, and we've been training up our volunteers and also partnering with the fellowship and churches to help train people on how to offer spiritual care, and specifically with seniors and people who might have dementia. So there's a lot of great things that are happening across the province, and it's a great organization. And as you can see, it's kind of broad and deep in terms of who we serve across the province.
Yeah, and it's really large. So one of the things I think that many of our churches wouldn't know, Mark, is just the scope of it. So would it be accurate for me to say you are the largest faith-based seniors care provider where housing is concerned in British Columbia?
We're definitely one of the largest. I think, Salvation Army has a very large organization, and it has many facets to it as well. But in terms of the denominational providers, we are definitely one of the largest at this point in the province. I think Good Samaritan is another one that is pretty large. But to be in that many communities for us it's a privilege and an honor. We don't take it for granted that we have that opportunity to serve that many people every day, and not only them, but also their family members and loved ones as well.
Yeah, one of the things that I found kind of exciting about it, and I've got to know more kind of from my role in the last decade or so in this, is to see how deep the roots of Baptist housing are in seniors care in BC, and to notice how much the government appreciates that. So that's, again, something many of our guys wouldn't know. Typically in our churches, they're looking at seniors care, that kind of thing, and they're thinking, well, the government and the church does not work hand in hand ever on this stuff. But I know the government really appreciates Baptist housing. They've come to you guys a fair bit in recent sorts of years, talking to you and requesting you to take over things and actually lead them. Is that accurate as well?
Yeah, it's an interesting time in our industry, in the senior care, senior living industry in BC and across Canada. It's a time of industry consolidation. It's happening both on the for-profit side and also on the nonprofit side. And so basically what can happen at this point is that there's a lot of nonprofits who maybe need the support in the changing world of our sector. And it might be because they have trouble recruiting board members, or they don't have the organizational sophistication to kind of handle what's coming and the challenges, or just the resources to be able to deal with how the industry changes. And so because of our history, our relationship with government that goes back to the 60s, and the strength of our team, we have this reputation where government has invited us to get involved in acquisitions. We've also been approached by other nonprofit boards to speak with them about kind of carrying their legacy forward into the future. And so, just in the last year, the last 12 months, we've grown by 1/3 through those kinds of opportunities. And so it's amazing to see it happen, really, because you can't plan some of this stuff. We were before West Van City Council recently, and the mayor of West Van, her mother-in-law happens to live in one of our communities, and we didn't know that until we got before her. And that's the kind of thing that you can't plan. It's God going before us, and it's His ministry. We don't consider it any other way.
Yeah, it's interesting. I was at the opening for Wing's new transition homes, which was just a month or two ago, just before sort of COVID hit, actually, I think beginning in December, maybe. And it was interesting. The Minister for Mental Health and Addictions was there, and she was just doing a little TV spot as part of the government funding for a transition home. And so for those of you who don't know, Wings is Women in Need Getting Strength. It's another of our agencies that works with women fleeing domestic violence. But I was at the opening for that, and Dale Cron from your office was there, and the minister noticed that he was there, and noticed that Wings was sort of Fellowship Pacific connected and Baptist Housing was connected, and that we had a little conversation about some of the other things like New Hope and different things. And it was kind of like, it was a dawning for her. And it was interesting TV spot her talking about how faith-based communities and Christian groups make such a big difference in our province. And I don't know that she had put together those different organizations as being tied together in one kind of family of churches. So it's pretty exciting actually to see and notice that. And great to have Dale Cron there as well. Marc, let me ask you a little bit about what you're doing right now. So one of the reasons this is timely for us to do this with you is because of COVID-19, obviously. So we're starting these podcasts. Hopefully it's a good thing that keeps on going. But for now, it's a way of encouraging our churches and also getting them to be able to pray for various parts of our family of churches as well. So with 21 seniors residences ranging in different kinds, as you mentioned, from independent living and rentals, even right through to more complex care, there's obvious huge danger. And I'm sure that's a big issue for you guys right now. So how's that impacting you directly as an organization?
Well, I can tell you, we set up a COVID response team pretty much right away as this started to expand and grow in terms of the spread of the virus in BC. And so for the last month and a half, we've had a team that's been available 24 hours a day to support anyone in our frontline teams who have issues that come up or potential outbreaks that have happened. You would have seen on the news that specifically in long-term care, there's a lot of outbreaks that have happened. Seniors are extremely vulnerable to the virus. And so we've actually had two cases within our own residences. They were declared outbreaks by the provincial health officer. One was a care team member at Inglewood Care Center in West Vancouver. The other was a resident at Evergreen Heights Assisted Living in White Rock. And in both cases, it was only a single case that never went further, yet they call it an outbreak and they send in their infection control teams to help you. We're pretty thankful that in both those cases, they didn't expand beyond that. And now both have been resolved and the person is no longer testing positive in both those cases, which is great. But this impacts everything. It's you get some people who are now working at home, like many of the offices have shut down. But our people who are in frontline, they're all working very differently in terms of how they have to work and interact with residents. We're having to use the PPE, the personal protective equipment. Many people are working longer. There's often less team available to us than normal because they've gone to the single site rules in terms of who's allowed to work where. And that's a key thing to help reduce the spread, is to not have healthcare workers working in multiple locations, so there's not cross-pollination. And then we've had to make tons of decisions about how we limit resident activities and interaction with family and visitation. And so it's been a major shift in the way that we conduct our ministry over the last 2 months, for sure.
So a lot of things in there that impact you, and also a lot of things in there that we hear pretty much on the news every day, elements of that. So let's just start with simple stuff. Do you guys have enough access to the protective equipment? Because we hear pretty regularly there isn't enough, and people and some of these frontline workers are kind of afraid of going back to their family because of that. Do you guys have enough of that?
We are constantly dealing with shortages and the threat of running out. And if you have what's kind of unique about this is that even if somebody has symptoms of flu, even if we don't think it's COVID-19, we have to go on to droplet precautions, they call it. So you then have to wear, whether it's the face shield or the mask or the gloves and gown and so on. And so when you have any residents on that, all of a sudden you're burning through your PPE really quickly. And so we face shortages in several of our locations. So far, we've got a special team who their job is to find kind of non-conventional sources of PPE from, whether it be hardware stores or other industries or whatever we can find that we can use, and also go through the government and the health authorities to help us where they have supply. But that would be an area where if any of our churches or church members have access to PPE, we would accept donations of that. And if there isn't a Baptist housing residence close by, Safe Care BC will also accept donations. They have a provincial program for that. It's a key issue for addressing the virus and to try to reduce the risk of spread.
Yeah, and a problem for all kinds of places, and with 21 residents is pretty much bound to be a problem for you too, I guess.
It is.
Yeah. Yeah, it was interesting to me. I was looking online yesterday, Mark, just sort of in preparation for this, about where some of the outbreaks were. I know Howard had mentioned to me the two instances that you mentioned. Howard Johnson, the CEO for Baptist Housing, had mentioned those spots. I didn't realize that they considered them outbreaks that quickly. I was reading some of the criteria for what determines an outbreak and what doesn't. It's just kind of fascinating. And a little bit terrifying to hear outbreaks. So when you hear those words, you're thinking, 20, 30, 40 people, COVID-19 and deaths in the seniors' residences, all that kind of thing. So does that mean you guys have to control your message pretty well? Be sure that you're consistent in what you're saying to people?
Well, it changes everything when you get into a situation where you have even a single case. And normally, an outbreak of flu is when there are 2 or more people who show symptoms. You then start to take action. But in the case of COVID, if you get a single case, even if the person maybe is a team member who's not coming to work, they're at home, but you still go into outbreak mode. Which means you're amping up your infection control in terms of cleaning. You're closing dining rooms so that you're not having residents congregate together. You're having to change the way that you work in the building so that people are not moving from kind of floor to floor, but rather you're keeping people working in a single place and not transmitting through housekeepers moving from floor to floor or wing to wing. All of that stuff changes pretty fast. And if you do it right, as Dr. Bonnie Henry has talked about, you have timing and luck on your side, and we would also say the Lord's blessing. Maybe you can keep it from spreading. But some of our peer providers have not been, so fortunate, and they've had, a lot of death that has come as a result of this. And I don't think that they haven't done things as well as us or anything like that. It's not like that. It's you can everyone's doing their best, but when it comes down to it, some places, because of the way it's transmitted and how it transmits when you're asymptomatic, you just don't know who it's going to impact. And we've been very fortunate to not have it worse than we have.
Yeah, it's a scary deal, I think, because you're just never sure, the next day. It's probably a little bit intimidating to actually even say this kind of publicly, like in a podcast, because, tomorrow could be different. And, so I guess that's a reality for it.
It's true. You don't know what's going to happen next or where it's going to spring up next. And I think we've all been surprised at some of the places. And again, it's an extremely unpredictable virus and the way that it spreads.
Yeah. So Mark, tell us, I don't know if you can do this, but let's try anyway, to kind of tell us what a day in the life of looks like for a person who's in some degree of care within one of your seniors' residences anyway. Well, let's start. Is it the same for everybody in them regardless now? So some you have, again, that have rental, some have independent living, others are under a much more intensive complex care kind of scenario. Is it the same for everybody, or do you have to segregate or separate the way you approach COVID and even the way you do restrictions depending on the group of people?
It started as a little bit different depending on where someone lived, but at this point in kind of the phase of the pandemic we're in, it's pretty much the same for everyone. The people that probably have the most freedom or discretion in terms of how they live are the people who live in independent apartment buildings. Where they're not really receiving services from us, they're in an apartment, and so you can't be telling people that have an apartment that they can't come and go, or they can't have visitors, and so on. And so for us, it's the same. Our residents who are in those settings, we encourage them not to go out, we encourage them not to have visitors, yet they have some freedom that maybe other folks don't have who live where there's services and healthcare. And in those apartment settings, we're just trying to keep up with our cleaning of the elevators and doors and railings and all of that, so that if there are people that come and go, and there is someone who comes in who is infected, we're disinfecting after they leave, so that it doesn't spread into one of those buildings. But at this point, in any of our other residences, where in independent living or assisted living or long-term care, it's pretty much stay at home, just like we're all being told. We're trying to encourage our residents to stay in your suite. Do what you do in there, and whether that's watching TV or connecting with family and friends on video conference or on the telephone, and do puzzles, read books, all those things that everyone is starting to do more. That's what our residents are doing. The dining rooms are now shut down. We're delivering meals to every suite. Our activity programs are limited to only activities where we can keep a 2-meter distance between residents. And so that can look like a walk around the block if you're properly social distancing. And so we're trying to take advantage of some of those opportunities to do things where we can. Yet we're really trying to say to our residents, don't go out unless you need to for a medical appointment or for an emergency. In terms of visiting, we're now at the point where essential visitors only, and that essential really comes down to end of life care. So if your loved one is close to passing, then you're able to visit. But otherwise, visitors are just seen as more risk, and so we're trying to keep visitation to the absolute minimum. And the trouble for a senior in the way this is impacting everyone is that isolation has always been a major threat to the health of seniors. When you're isolated, that then leads to whether it's depression or malnutrition, if you don't eat right, and all those things, they kind of pile on top of each other. And so now we're in a situation where isolation is the thing that can save lives. And so you're on this tough fence to straddle, where the very thing that can save lives in terms of not spreading the virus is a thing that is very detrimental to seniors, and that's being alone. And so, again, we're having to do things differently. Our chaplains are now doing visitation by phone or by video conference. One of our chaplains is reading our daily bread with residents over the phone, so that he can have that time with them and minister to them. We've got FaceTime programs with family members. We've had literally hundreds and hundreds of FaceTime calls that we facilitate between residents and their family so that they can stay connected. And so every day is very much different from what it used to be. I mean, our environments are highly social places where there is just an abundant activity program, and all of that has kind of ground to a halt, and we're trying to facilitate the connection between people, because that will help to keep people alive and sustain through the duration of the pandemic.
Yeah, big deal, and pretty hard to do, I think. And I think we read about that pretty much every day in newspaper, something about that balance between isolation, needing it, and yet it being difficult for seniors as well.
And just to say, at the beginning of this, I think people weren't very happy when we started to do things like restrict visitation or start to reduce programs. And then all of a sudden we hit this tipping point where for residents and their families, we weren't moving fast enough. And they were saying, close the dining room, restrict more visitation, don't let people go outside. And so I think people got it in their heads that this is real. And that in some ways made it easier for us to then take the steps we needed to take to protect people.
Yeah, you're probably a heightened microcosm of society in that. So it'll be interesting when you start to loosen restrictions, how you get flack in both directions as well, not fast enough and doing it too fast. So I'm sure that'll happen. Hey, yep. Marc, you mentioned chaplains. So one of the things that's kind of intriguing for a conservative evangelical group like our own family and a large, broad-based kind of agency like yourself, you serve all kinds of people, not just people from a Christian tradition. And yet you have chaplains there, and we know that you care a lot about sharing the gospel with all of the individuals and helping disciple those that already know Christ that are in there. So can you give us any stories of kind of opportunities that maybe have arisen out of this, realizing again that you have to behave ethically and with appropriateness to people of different faith traditions?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and you hit the nail on the head there. I mean, we we have spiritual care chaplains in every one of our residences around the province. We've got a great number of spiritual care volunteers who are part of our ministry as well. And we're open to support our residents, no matter what kind of background they have and even what faith they might have grown up in or are currently pursuing. We want to get into a spiritual dialogue with people if they're willing and if they want to. And so, as usual, this has given us an opportunity to do that. And one of the areas where you're able to have conversations with people right now is just around fear. Because this is I think everyone's had their own experience with fear in a different way through the pandemic. And so it opens doors when people go through a situation like this, where a chaplain can get into a conversation about why we're afraid, and how, God can, and the presence of God can help us to deal with the fear that we face and have peace and comfort in the Lord. And so that's a conversation that springs from the pandemic. And I think just like all of us get into those conversations in our own personal lives that are different during the pandemic, it's the same for our residents. They're experiencing whether it's I'm lonely, I can't connect with my community or my family, whatever the need is, it gives us an opportunity to come alongside and support. Whether the person's a follower of the Lord or not, we're wanting to be there to provide that kind of assistance. In terms of the way that we maybe are changing and having to shift and adjust how we do some of our spiritual care ministry, we've had a couple of unique things happen, and probably there's dozens of stories that we could tell. One comes out of Armstrong, where many of our residents are used to having a Good Friday service in our apartment building there. Of course, they weren't able to do that, but they took it on their own initiative to set up a service in the parking lot. And so they had the chaplain set up the sound equipment, and these residents came out with instruments, and they had a Good Friday service right there in the parking lot with every resident invited. They were all in lawn chairs, kind of spread out across the parking lot area, so they could still celebrate Good Friday and invite their neighbors to do so also. So that's just a great story of even how residents initiate that to make sure that the gospel is proclaimed and also Jesus is celebrated. Another example is in our Abbotsford residences, where family members, some folks from our head office and local church members came together and did Easter services from the outside of the building in Abbotsford there, and they actually did it 5 times. They kept moving around the building in so that,
Awesome.
that every resident could out the window on their balcony be a part of that. And just like the community around us, our residents are not the majority of them are not believers. We reflect the community in a residence like we have in Abbotsford, and so there are people there who are hearing from their window or their balcony music and a sermon that proclaims the resurrection message of Easter, and they get it 5 times around the building. It was just an awesome way for us to reach out to them, and our chaplain Randy Evans out there did a great job of speaking to the people. So the gospel is being spread in creative ways through the crisis. Not only at Baptist Housing but everywhere. We've got to be we got to respond to the challenge uniquely and creatively.
Yeah, it's interesting. I have a privilege, I think a number of the last years anyway, to drop in on your chaplain's retreat and spend a bit of time with them when they meet together with Ray Sosi and run through. It's a great group of people, very committed to sharing Christ, and it's a fascinating world in which they do that. And you do have some people, crazy people like Randy Evans, who will find some way to share Christ no matter what. And
exactly.
Yeah, it's exciting and interesting, and always sort of fun to listen to. Of course, Randy's great to hear stories from at any time as well, because he'll let that roll for us. So last question for you, Marc. Try and honor your time a little bit. So how can our churches or people help you guys? You've got, again, these people in a lockdown scenario where they're isolated. Is there anything that our churches that are around your residences could do that would be helpful to you or encouraging to your residential people, I guess?
Yeah, well, if I can step up on a bit of a soapbox, the most important thing that everyone can do is to stay home. And I think we've heard that message, but I want to repeat it. the majority of the deaths that have happened in our province and across the country are happening to seniors in long-term care or in the community. And the less the virus spreads, the less seniors die. And every one of these seniors is somebody's grandma or grandpa. And so that's really important for us to take it seriously. Some people are actually kind of downplaying the virus and comparing it to influenza and saying, more people die from influenza, and yet here we are focused on COVID-19. And I would spin that around and challenge people to take COVID really seriously, but also take influenza more seriously. There's not enough people who are getting their flu shot every year to reduce the transmission of influenza. And when we get a vaccine for COVID, we should be getting our COVID shot as well. So that is going to help seniors greatly in our ministry, so that we don't have to support families who are losing a loved one because of COVID or influenza or anything else. The other area, we talked about it earlier, is just personal protective equipment, that PPE. If our churches or church members have access to PPE that they can donate to Baptist Housing or to Safe Care BC, that would be very much appreciated. It's literally hard to find, and you get down to a day's supply sometimes, and you're wondering, how do you provide safe care if you don't have enough masks or face shields to do so? And so that's a huge deal. Then on a personal level, I would ask everyone to reach out to the seniors around them, reach out to the seniors in your church. Many of them right now may not have a lot of social connection, and they need it. And so in our church, we've been challenged by Pastor Brent to reach out to two people a day to make a connection. And I would just encourage people, reach out to a couple of seniors in your church to make sure that they're not, that isolation isn't getting the best of them, is probably the best way to put it. And then if we can all pray for the flattening of the curve, and that the virus will slow in terms of its spread, and also that we'll be able to find an antiviral treatment for it, and develop that so that we can slow the spread and have less death resulting from COVID-19. That would be what I would want to ask from our churches.
Yeah, that's great, Marc. And one of the really good things about this call is because we're both in the same church. This is one of our two people that we talk to during the day. So we only have to do one more. That's the great news out of that.
Well, I think my wife just got home, so I can say hi to her.
Yeah, you can cover them both off, right? Just like that. Exactly. Anyway, thanks for spending the time with us to do this. We appreciate it. I think anybody in kind of my stage of life at least has, parents. I have two sets of parents still here, which is a blessing from the Lord. So my parents are both 91. Mine are in their 80s, mid 80s. And I think COVID scares all of us, and we're phoning our parents all the time, telling them stay in. Mm-hmm. So your advice applies right across the board, just to individually where parents are still at home, and to seniors throughout our province, because they certainly are at risk. So appreciate very much what you guys do and work you're putting into this. You're right at the forefront of, like you said, where many of the deaths, maybe the majority of the deaths, are coming from. And so it's a scary time. So we will be praying for you. Appreciate the partnership so much, and appreciate you taking the time to share that a bit with us today.
Thank you, David.
Thanks for listening to today's episode. We hope you will continue to be in prayer for our partners at Baptist Housing, especially right now, as they are very much on the front lines during this pandemic. And as Marc shared, they do have an urgent need for personal protective equipment. If you have any to donate, you can do so at any of their locations or at Safe Care BC, and you'll find links to both of those in our show notes. As always, our team at the Fellowship Pacific Ministry Center is committed to serving you. To find out more about the resources we have available and how we can support you, visit www.fedpacific.ca.